Hollywood sells dreams built on light and glamour. But some of its darkest secrets never made it to the screen. They stayed behind locked gates and crumbling walls. Tonight, we begin a descent into 12 abandoned mansions where fame curdled into scandal. These are not ghost stories invented for tourists. These are real places, real people, real cover-ups, and the echoes are still there. Number 12. Pickfair Mansion, Los Angeles. Pickfair was never meant to be abandoned. It was meant to be immortal. Built in 1919 and expanded into a fairy tale estate in Beverly Hills, it became the symbolic palace of Hollywood royalty. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks were not just movie stars. They were the movie industry. Studio bosses bowed to them. Politicians dined with them. The press treated Pickfair like a sacred temple. But behind its gates, the myth was already cracking. By the early 1920s, Pickford's wholesome image was a lie everyone in power agreed to protect. Her marriage to Fairbanks began in scandal after both secretly divorced their spouses. Hollywood covered it up. Pickfair became the setting for parties where alcohol flowed during Prohibition and where studio executives negotiated contracts that quietly destroyed careers. Guests later described the mansion not as joyful but tense. Performative. A place where everyone smiled while watching their backs. As the years passed, the house absorbed tragedy. Fairbanks declined rapidly. Pickford retreated into alcoholism and isolation. Rooms once filled with laughter were sealed off. Servants reported hearing her pacing late at night, speaking to people who were not there. By the time Pickford died in 1979, Pickfair was already considered cursed. No owner could keep it. Renovations stalled. Buyers walked away. The mansion was eventually demolished, but its long abandonment beforehand became legendary. What haunts Pickfair is not a single death. It is the realization that Hollywood's first power couple built their empire on illusion and control. Pickfair stands as the prototype for every celebrity mansion that followed. A place where image mattered more than truth, where silence was purchased, and where the cost was paid slowly behind closed doors. Pickfair did not fall into ruin because of neglect. It fell because the lie it represented could no longer survive daylight. Number 11. The Sodden House, Los Angeles. From the outside, the Sodden House looks like modernist elegance. Yet sharp angles, Mayan-inspired concrete. Designed by Lloyd Wright, it was supposed to symbolize creative rebellion. Instead, it became permanently fused to one of Hollywood's most infamous crimes, the Black Dahlia murder. In 1947, Elizabeth Short was found mutilated and posed in a vacant lot. The crime shocked America. But investigators quickly discovered that Hollywood itself was a closed system. Studio fixers interfered, leads vanished, suspects were protected, and one name kept resurfacing in whispers. Dr. George Huddle. Huddle was a physician, a well-connected man, and the owner of the Sodden House. Police bugged the mansion, believing it to be the murder site. What they recorded was chilling. Huddle speaking casually about murder, joking that he could never be convicted, suggesting that the police were fools. Yet, despite this evidence, the case was buried. Hodel fled the country. Hollywood exhaled. The house itself became unlivable. Owners reported footsteps, screams, doors opening on their own. But the real horror is not paranormal. It is institutional. This was a crime scene that could have been solved. Instead, Hollywood's power structure chose silence over justice. The Sodden House was sold and resold, each time abandoned again. Renovations failed. Occupants left. The Sodden House is haunted not by ghosts, but by proof. Proof that Hollywood protected itself, even when a young woman was butchered. Proof that truth was considered bad for business. And proof that some buildings are poisoned not by death, but by decisions. When people say the Sodden House feels wrong, they are correct. It is wrong. Because it stands as a monument to a crime that should never have gone unsolved. Number 10. Greystone Mansion, Beverly Hills. Greystone Mansion looks like old money carved into stone. Built in 1928 by oil heir Edward Doheny Jr., it was meant to be a permanent monument to wealth and power. Instead, it became one of Hollywood's quietest crime scenes, and one of its most carefully buried scandals. Just months after moving in, Doheny Jr. was found dead inside the mansion along with his secretary, Hugh Plunkett. Officially, it was ruled a murder-suicide. Unofficially, almost no one believed it. Plunkett had been loyal. There was no clear motive, and the timing was impossible to ignore. Doheny's father was already under federal investigation for the Teapot Dome scandal, the largest political corruption case in American history. Greystone immediately became radioactive. The family abandoned it. Studio elites whispered that the house was cursed. But the truth was simpler and darker. Greystone was inconvenient. too close to a scandal that connected Hollywood money oil barons and Washington power. The mansion was donated to the city and quietly repurposed. Its interior rooms were sealed off for years. Evidence was never revisited. Hollywood later reclaimed Greystone as a filming location. Countless movies used it as a symbol of luxury, while never mentioning the bodies once found inside. Crew members reported strange rules, certain rooms avoided, night shoots discouraged, guards hired not just for security but silence. Over time, the mansion became semi-abandoned between productions, a hollow shell used for image, while its history remained locked away. What haunts Greystone is not speculation. It is the unresolved question of who really died there and why the investigation stopped so quickly. This was not a haunted house problem. This was a power problem, a house that knew too much at the wrong moment. Greystone stands today, pristine and empty between shoots. But it is not neutral ground. It is a reminder that when money, influence, and reputation collide, truth is usually the first casualty. Number 9. The Knapp Castle, Santa Barbara County. Perched above the Los Padres National Forest, the Knapp Castle was designed as a retreat for the elite. Built in 1925 by George Washington Smith, it was meant to be a sanctuary where wealthy Californians and Hollywood insiders could disappear from public view. And many did. By the 1930s, the castle was being used unofficially as a hideaway for studio executives and actors caught in scandals too damaging for headlines. Pregnancies that could not be explained, affairs that crossed contractual morality clauses, nervous breakdowns that studios did not want audiences to know about. The castle was remote by design. No neighbors, no press, no questions. Accounts from former staff describe locked wings and long stays where no names were spoken aloud. One actress reportedly arrived after a suicide attempt and never returned to the screen. Another guest allegedly died under suspicious circumstances during a stormy night. The death was ruled natural. No autopsy was performed. Studio lawyers handled everything. The castle burned multiple times over the decades and was rebuilt again and again. Each fire erased records. Each restoration made the structure more isolated. Eventually, the owners stopped rebuilding. The site was abandoned. Nature reclaimed it. Hikers began reporting strange sensations, voices, feelings of being watched. But again, the fear was not supernatural. It was historical. Knapp Castle was not haunted because people died there. It was haunted because people were hidden there. Because careers ended there without explanation. Because the Hollywood machine used isolation as damage control. When the castle finally fell into ruin, it felt less like decay and more like exposure. Today, the ruins stand open to the sky. No guards, no gate. Just broken stone and silence. The kind of silence that comes after secrets have outlived their usefulness. Number 8. The Hearst Estate, San Francisco. High above San Francisco Bay, the Hearst Estate once represented refinement culture and artistic freedom. Built by silent film mogul William Randolph Hearst, associate Arthur Hart, the mansion became a northern refuge for Hollywood elites who wanted distance from Los Angeles scrutiny. It was quiet, exclusive, and deliberately invisible to the press. By the late 1920s, the estate had become a discreet gathering place for stars whose behavior could not be explained publicly. Actresses under long-term contracts were brought there under the pretense of rest cures. Some were recovering from nervous collapses, others from situations studios refused to acknowledge. Pregnancies, addiction, mental illness. The Hearst Estate was not a hospital. It was a holding pen. One young starlet arrived in 1931, after abruptly disappearing from films despite being under contract. Studio statements claimed illness, but witnesses later recalled her confinement. Letters were intercepted. She was forbidden from contacting family. Her career was quietly dissolved while the studio continued to profit from her earlier films. She reportedly died years later under an assumed name. No obituary mentioned Hollywood. Local police were aware of unusual activity, but the estate employed private security and lawyers with deep political connections. Complaints were dismissed. Fires broke out on the property more than once, destroying wings that housed records and guest logs. Each incident was ruled accidental. After Hart's death, the estate became unmanageable. No buyer could keep it occupied. Residents complained of oppressive silence and unexplained disturbances. But again, the truth was not paranormal. It was moral. This was a place built to erase people without paperwork. By the 1950s, the mansion was effectively abandoned. Hollywood never spoke of it again. When urban explorers finally entered decades later, they found sealed rooms, personal effects, and no documentation explaining who lived there or why they vanished. The Hearst Estate stands as proof that Hollywood did not always need violence to destroy lives. Sometimes, all it needed was isolation, a locked gate, and enough power to make sure no one asked questions. That's number 7. The Black Swan Mansion, Hollywood Hills. The Black Swan Mansion earned its name not from architecture, but from reputation. Built in the early 1920s, above Hollywood Boulevard, it was owned by a producer known for hosting private gatherings that never appeared in society columns. The mansion was deliberately excluded from studio publicity. No photographs were circulated. Guests arrived at night. Multiple accounts from former industry insiders describe the house as a place where contracts were negotiated through humiliation and coercion. Aspiring actors were invited under the promise of opportunity. What awaited them was pressure, silence agreements, career threats. This was decades before modern conversations about abuse. At the time, it was considered an open secret. In 1938, a young performer was reported missing after attending a party there. Police questioned the owner briefly and then closed the case citing lack of evidence. Studio executives intervened. The press was redirected. The performer's name disappeared from casting lists as if she never existed. Neighbors later reported hearing arguments and screaming during parties. But no complaints were logged. The owner died under suspicious circumstances in the 1940s. The mansion was sealed and sold multiple times, but never successfully occupied. Every renovation stalled. Contractors quit. Owners claimed the building felt hostile. What truly doomed the mansion was documentation. Decades later, personal letters surfaced describing the house as a place where careers were bought with silence and destroyed with refusal. Its names were redacted, but patterns were unmistakable. By the 1970s, the Black Swan Mansion was abandoned. Hollywood pretended it never existed. Today it stands deteriorating behind overgrowth its history, absent from official records, but preserved in survivor testimony. This is not a ghost story. This is a crime scene without a verdict. A reminder that Hollywood's darkest scandals were not always explosive. Sometimes they were quiet, repetitive, and profitable. Number 6. Marsh House. From the outside, the Marsh House appears restrained. A grand Pasadena estate built in the early 20th century with the quiet dignity of old California wealth. But unlike the flamboyant mansions of Hollywood Hills, this house was designed for privacy. And privacy is exactly why it became valuable to the studios. By the late 1930s, Pasadena had become a convenient halfway world. Close enough to Los Angeles to maintain control, far enough away to keep problems out of gossip columns. The Marsh House was quietly leased by intermediaries tied to major studios and used as a rest residence for actresses and writers who had become liabilities. Studio memos from the era used coded language: exhaustion, nervous collapse, temporary retreat. What they avoided saying was scandal, alcohol dependency, breakdown under production pressure, refusal to comply with private demands. The Marsh House functioned as a cooling chamber. Careers went in. Silence came out. Multiple women were housed there under strict supervision. Mail was screened. Visits restricted. Contracts were frozen rather than terminated to avoid lawsuits. The studios could wait. Time was their weapon. When actresses emerged months later, they were either compliant or irrelevant. Many never worked again. One case still circulates among historians. A rising supporting actress vanished from screens in 1942 after rejecting a powerful producer. Studio statements cited illness. But Pasadena residents recalled her being escorted into the Marsh House under guard. She was seen walking the grounds late at night, disoriented and distressed. Within a year, her contract was dissolved quietly. No public explanation, no return. Deaths connected to the house were ruled natural. No investigations went beyond surface level. Pasadena police deferred to legal representatives who arrived quickly and discouraged further inquiry. The house was scrubbed repeatedly, guest records destroyed. Renovations altered floor plans, making it impossible to reconstruct timelines. By the 1950s, the Marsh House developed a reputation even Hollywood could not ignore. Staff refused to work there. Owners complained of oppressive atmosphere and constant unease. The house was sold, then sold again. Each owner abandoned it within a few years. It eventually fell into long-term vacancy. The Marsh House is not remembered because something violent happened there. It is remembered because something systematic did. This was a place designed to neutralize people quietly, to let careers bleed out without witnesses. That is why the house feels empty even when occupied, because its true function was erasure. Number 5. Knapp Castle. Knapp Castle sits high above Santa Barbara County, isolated by design and surrounded by silence. Built in 1925, It was marketed as a romantic retreat, a fortress of stone and views, meant to inspire creativity. What it actually became was a pressure valve for Hollywood's worst secrets. By the 1930s, the castle was being used unofficially by studio executives as a containment space. When scandals could not be buried with contracts or bribes, they were buried geographically. Actors and actresses were sent here under the guise of rest or spiritual recovery. Some arrived voluntarily. Others did not. Former staff accounts describe locked wings and strict rules. Guests were not allowed to leave without approval. Names were never used in full. Communication with the outside world was filtered. The goal was not healing. It was compliance. Studios needed problems to cool off until the public forgot they existed. Several guests suffered breakdowns. One screenwriter reportedly jumped from an upper terrace after being told his contract would be voided if he spoke publicly about a producer's behavior. The death was ruled an accident. No press followed. The body was removed before dawn. The castle burned more than once. Each fire destroyed records and altered the structure. Rebuilds removed entire sections. Guest logs disappeared. Legal ownership shifted repeatedly through shell entities connected to industry figures. By the time authorities questioned the pattern, there was nothing left to examine. As Hollywood evolved, the castle lost its utility. New methods of suppression replaced physical isolation. Knapp Castle was abandoned. Nature took over. Fires returned. The structure collapsed gradually. Hikers later reported sensations of dread and voices carried by wind. But again, the truth is historical. This was not a place where ghosts lingered. It was a place where human beings were discarded once they stopped being profitable. Knapp Castle stands today as ruins, exposed, unprotected, finally honest in its decay. Because unlike Hollywood narratives, there is no happy ending here. Just stone walls that once hid the cost of silence. Number 4. Sodden House. The Sodden House is one of the few Hollywood mansions where the scandal is not speculative. It is documented, recorded, and then deliberately ignored. Designed by Lloyd Wright and completed in 1926, the house was meant to symbolize modernity and rebellion. Instead, it became permanently entangled with the most infamous unsolved murder in Hollywood history. The killing of Elizabeth Short. The Black Dahlia. In 1947, police wiretapped the Sodden House because they believed it was connected to the crime. The owner at the time, Dr. George Hodel, was not a fringe suspect. He was a prime suspect, a wealthy physician, well-connected, untouchable. Police surveillance recorded him making chilling statements, including claims that he could never be convicted, that the police had nothing, that even if he had killed her, they could not prove it. The tapes existed. The investigation stalled anyway. Why? Because Hodel was protected by a network of power that extended into law enforcement, medicine, and entertainment. Hollywood was already under pressure. Studio scandals were mounting. The industry could not afford a brutal murder connected to one of its elite circles. So the investigation was quietly defanged. Surveillance ended. Evidence was ignored. Hodel left the country. The house remained. Owners who followed reported immediate unease. Renovations uncovered hidden passageways. Rooms sealed without architectural explanation. Former LAPD officers later confirmed that parts of the house had been altered after the murder investigation ended. Why alter a crime-adjacent property unless there was something to hide? Over time, the Sodden House became uninhabitable, not because of superstition, but because of exposure. Every new owner reopened the same question. What really happened here? And every time the answer pointed toward institutional failure, Hollywood treated the house as a liability. It was excluded from official histories. Its role minimized. Even today, discussions of the Black Dahlia often avoid naming the location. But survivors and investigators did not forget. Hodel's own son later accused him publicly, backed by evidence ignored decades earlier. The Sodden House is abandoned, not because it is haunted. It is abandoned because it is a physical reminder that justice was deliberately denied. That when Hollywood's image was threatened, truth was sacrificed. And once that line is crossed, no amount of renovation can make a place clean again. This is not a ghost house. It is an unresolved crime scene, and Hollywood knows it. Number 3. Greystone Mansion. Greystone Mansion is often photographed, frequently filmed, and carefully misunderstood. Completed in 1928, it was the most expensive private residence ever built in California at the time. A monument to oil money and ambition. Edward Dehaney Jr. moved in and was dead within months. He was found in a guest bedroom with his secretary, Hugh Plunkett. Both had gunshot wounds. The official ruling was murder-suicide. The problem was, the evidence never aligned with the conclusion. No clear motive, no signs of struggle, and a family already entangled in one of the largest corruption scandals in American history. Teapot Dome. Edward Doheny Sr. was fighting federal scrutiny. His son's sudden death threatened to expose financial trails and political bribes that connected Washington to California oil wealth. The investigation was rushed, press access restricted, witness statements sealed. Within days, the case was closed. The mansion emptied. Hollywood quietly absorbed Greystone into its ecosystem, not as a residence, as a backdrop. It became scenery, a symbol stripped of context. Films shot there avoided mentioning its history. Crew members spoke of off-limit rooms, locked wings, instructions not to ask questions. City ownership did not bring transparency. It brought preservation, without explanation. Greystone became a beautiful shell. No one lived there. No one slept there overnight. Events ended early. Security was constant. Why? Because Greystone represents something Hollywood cannot resolve. A death tied to political corruption. A crime scene preserved as an aesthetic object. A place where truth was inconvenient. Multiple independent investigators later questioned the murder-suicide ruling. Ballistics inconsistencies, timeline issues, witness contradictions. None were revisited officially. The mansion was easier to maintain than the truth. Greystone is not abandoned in the traditional sense. It is hollowed out, kept pristine, sanitized, emptied of narrative, which is a more sophisticated form of abandonment. Hollywood did not destroy Greystone. It neutralized it, turned it into wallpaper, because confronting what happened there would mean admitting that power once again overruled justice. And that is a haunting Hollywood still refuses to face. Number 2. Black Swan Mansion. The Black Swan Mansion was never listed in studio directories. That omission was intentional. Built in the early 1920s above Hollywood Boulevard, the mansion belonged to a producer whose influence far outweighed his public profile. He did not need his name on marquees. He controlled casting rooms, contracts, futures. And the Black Swan became the place where that power was exercised away from cameras. Unlike party houses celebrated in fan magazines, this mansion was absent from publicity. Guests were invited privately. Arrivals happened after dark. Drivers waited outside with engines running. Former assistants later described the house as functional rather than luxurious. Rooms designed for meetings, not comfort. Bedrooms repurposed as negotiation spaces. Silence, enforced by threat rather than agreement. Multiple testimonies describe young performers invited under the promise of screen tests. What followed were coercive encounters framed as career necessities. Refusal meant blacklist. Compliance meant contracts. This was not rumor. This was an operating system. Not long before the term casting couch entered public language, this house was already infamous inside the industry. In 1938, a young actress attended a gathering there and vanished. A missing persons report was filed quietly. Police interviewed the owner briefly. Studio lawyers arrived before sunrise. The investigation stalled within days. Press never printed her name. Studio records later showed her contract terminated for breach without explanation. Neighbors recalled hearing arguments and screams during late-night gatherings. No complaints were logged. Police calls disappeared. The owner died in the 1940s under circumstances never fully explained. The mansion was sealed almost immediately. Contents removed overnight. Rooms stripped. Records vanished. Every subsequent attempt to occupy the house failed. Your renovations stopped abruptly. Contractors refused to return. Owners claimed the space felt hostile, not haunted. Hostile, as if the building resisted occupation. Decades later, letters surfaced from former performers describing the mansion in unmistakable terms. No ghosts, no embellishment, just fear, pressure, and the understanding that silence was the price of survival. By the 1970s, the Black Swan Mansion was abandoned. Hollywood never acknowledged it. No plaques, no retrospectives, no documentaries. Because to admit what happened, there would mean admitting that abuse was not an exception. It was infrastructure. This house remains standing not as a ghost story, but as evidence. Evidence that Hollywood knew, and chose silence anyway. Number 1. Cecil B. DeMille Estate. At the top of this list is not a ruin hidden in hills or forests. It is something more disturbing. A mansion that disappeared entirely, because its history was too dangerous to preserve. Cecil B. DeMille was one of Hollywood's most powerful architects. His image was biblical, patriarchal, untouchable. His private estate functioned as an extension of that power, not just a home, a court. Former staff and contemporaries described the mansion as a place where careers were judged and decided. Actors summoned privately, loyalty tested, morality enforced selectively. DeMille publicly preached discipline while privately controlling lives through fear and favoritism. Several actresses associated with DeMille's productions suffered abrupt career collapses after private visits. Studio explanations varied. Difficult temperament, health issues, moral failings, none aligned with reality. Contracts dissolved quietly, names erased from publicity. One incident in the 1930s involved a young performer who reportedly threatened to speak publicly after being pressured behind closed doors. She was removed from production, sent away. Her disappearance was explained as retirement. She was never seen in Hollywood again. The mansion itself became a liability after DeMille's death. Unlike Pickfair, it was not preserved. Unlike Greystone, it was not repurposed. It was demolished, quickly, thoroughly. No effort made to retain it as historical property. No preservation campaign. No protest. Why erase a mansion tied to one of Hollywood's most celebrated figures? Because the building held too many memories that contradicted the myth. Former employees described rooms where meetings ended in tears, where threats were delivered calmly, where power was exercised without witnesses. Destroying the house ensured no future investigation could reconstruct timelines. No floor plans. No corroboration. This was not abandonment. It was deletion. Hollywood did not want a site that could invite questions about its foundational figures, so it removed the evidence entirely and rewrote the narrative. That is why this ranks number 1. Because the most haunted Hollywood mansions are not the ones left to rot. They are the ones erased so thoroughly that the industry pretends they never existed. And that silence is the loudest scandal of all. Hollywood loves to sell the idea that the past is finished, that the scandals were isolated, that the buildings are empty because time moved on. But these mansions tell a different story. They were abandoned because they remembered too much. Power does not vanish. It erases. And if we listen carefully to what was left behind, we hear the same warning repeated again and again. Silence was never accidental.